Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me today for episode 688 of People Behind the Science. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and today we are excited to reshare our conversation with Dr. Tara Smith, originally released on November 28th of 2014. Now, listeners, Tara is an epidemiologist and infectious disease expert, and her work focuses on infections that can be transferred between humans and animals. Among her many accomplishments, she was the first person to identify livestock-associated strains of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, or MRSA, in the United States, and she has conducted groundbreaking research on this microbe. Tara is also an avid science communicator and author of multiple books about science for the public. And in this episode, Tara shares great stories and insights from her experiences in life and science, so get ready to get inspired in this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. I am excited to be here today with Dr. Tara Smith. Great to chat with you today, Tara. How's everything going?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We are delighted to chat with you today. Now, listeners, Tara is an associate professor in epidemiology at Kent State University and adjunct associate professor of epidemiology at the University of Iowa. She received her PhD in microbiology from the Medical College of Ohio in Toledo and completed a postdoctoral fellowship in epidemiology at the University of Michigan. Afterward, Tara served on the faculty at the University of Iowa for about 8 years before joining the faculty there at Kent State. Now, Tara is here with us today to tell us all about her journey through life and science. So today, Tara, we are thrilled to get to know you, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you take a few minutes here to tell us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
Sure. When I'm not on the job, I do have 3 kids. I have a 14-year-old daughter, a 12-year-old son, and a 7-month-old son. So they keep me very busy between just general mommy duties, and they're active in a lot of sports and music activities. So usually when I'm not doing science, I'm at home kind of trying to hold down the fort.
Absolutely. That sounds fantastic. Great to hear they're able to spend some time with your family. Certainly shuttling them to all those activities, I know, is quite a handful.
Oh, yes. My second job is a bus driver.
That's right. That's right. Well, fantastic to hear about how you spend your time when you're not at work. Can you tell us next a little bit about how you spend your time at work? How do you describe what you do to someone who's not in science?
Sure. I usually describe my job as just, I work with germs. People usually understand kind of what germs are pretty generally. If I get into more specifics, I talk about that I work with germs, specifically bacteria, that move between animals and people.
Fantastic. Well, that is a fascinating area of research. And I think a lot of people, get excited about these things. These are things that people can relate to. It's something that they worry about in their everyday life. Mm-hmm. So great area and way to describe it to people. Now, it's amazing when I think about all the things that researchers have to get done in a day. And you mentioned kind of juggling family life with all the research that you're doing and certainly the things that you like to do outside of the lab. Now, can you tell us what motivates you? Is there maybe a quote or a saying, a mantra that you keep in your mind that helps you get through every day?
I'm not so big on the motivational quotes. If you look in my office or my home, you won't see any of the nice little signs or the kittens with the hang in there on my wall.
The posters, yeah.
Right. But I am a big movie buff, and I especially like a lot of nerd movies. So as the great philosopher Yoda once said, do or do not, and there is no try. So I really use that a lot, especially again with having younger kids and even sometimes with my younger students, that oftentimes people are very, scared to do something that's new. The idea that, okay, they'll just try something and really set themselves up for not succeeding, I think is kind of a bad way to approach things. So
certainly,
I tend to go into everything kind of head first and, just put my all into it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and that's fine. And you learn from failures. But I try to approach things as if they're going to work the first time and then troubleshoot from there.
Absolutely. I love this approach, this motivational quote from the great Yoda. And I think you're absolutely right. You have to commit to doing it or commit to not doing it. None of this wishy-washy try business.
Exactly.
Well, fantastic motivational quote. Now, can you tell us a little bit about some of the people in your life who may have motivated you or maybe served as role models across your years in science and just in life in general?
Mm-hmm. I've been lucky that, ever since I was an undergraduate, I've had some really great bosses and mentors. And most of them actually have been female. The only male bosses that I had were during my PhD. During my undergraduate research, I had 2 great female mentors in infectious disease epidemiology. And during my postdoc, I also had a woman mentor. And, they showed me that women can succeed in science in kind of a guy's world, typically, and that they can do it without that being their entire life. They all had families, they all were very successful at work, but also managed to have some of that kind of mythical work-life balance that everyone is striving for. So, they showed me that you can combine a very successful and high-profile career. I mean, one of my mentors was the president of our Epidemiological Society, but still do that in a way that you don't have to do 80 hours a week in the lab. You can still have time outside of it for your hobbies and for your family and for other things that you like to do that really, I think, make your science a little bit better. And so those were some of my immediate mentors and role models. But microbiology is also nice in that there are some, again, women in the history of this who have done great things. I started my PhD looking at a bacterium called group A strep. If you've had strep throat, it's the one that typically causes it. And one of the people who really blazed a trail on that was a woman named Rebecca Lansfield. And there's actually a typing system named after her, the Lansfield grouping system, that actually divides strep up into group A and group B and group C. She's the one who really developed all of that. There's another woman, Alice Evans, who was actually one of the early presidents of, at that time, it was the Society for Bacteriologists rather than just microbiology in general. Mm-hmm. But, she was, again, one of the pioneers in the field doing work in this area when people didn't really accept women into the field. And Esther Lederberg, who was married to her more famous husband, but she also did a lot of early work in bacterial genetics and really developed some of the methods that allowed some of the genetic work to go forward. So there are some, great women, and, I could go on all day probably naming some more, but some great women trailblazers in that field as well that, I've looked up to as I was going through my career.
Tara, it is great to hear about these people who really shaped your life, shaped your career, and who you were able to look up to. I think it's great that you mentioned these mentors that you've had throughout your life who, taught you science, but also taught you these almost life lessons, how to have a career with balance, family and your career at the same time. And even just to show you that it's possible, because I think a lot of people start feeling, like you have to choose one or the other. And I think that's not the case.
Yeah, it gets overwhelming. And I think many people are kind of scared to show that, yes, you can have a family, and that they're worried they will get, looked down upon as a lesser scientist if they also feel they want to do something besides be a scientist all day, every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So I think it is important. And when I do things, I try to put out the fact that I do have a family, and, I do feel I'm trying to be a successful scientist in this field, even with, 3 kids in tow.
Certainly. Well, that is fantastic. And great to hear, too, about these big leaders in microbiology who you were able to look up to, who are also women scientists doing amazing work in the field. And, I think it's great to have these figures in your life to really model your own career after kind of take little bits and pieces of things that everyone does well and try and apply them in your own work.
Absolutely.
Now, it's great to hear about these people who shaped your life, but I'm curious, Tara, to hear about how your interest in science began. Can you tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest to begin with, and then maybe hit some of these key moments along your journey to tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I always liked science even as a kid, but I grew up in rural Ohio and just did not even think of science as a career. I mean, I didn't know anyone who was a scientist. I hadn't thought about that as a profession. So early on, my mom was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was about 6 years old. So I had a long interest in health and disease and, what makes one person sick while another person stays well. Again, I didn't know at the time that, there was a term for that, and that's basically epidemiology. But, I knew I was very interested in health and medicine. So initially I was in school kind of in the age of the books like The Coming Plague and The Hot Zone, which now I'm kind of fighting against a little bit with this current Ebola outbreak, and everyone thinks that it's going to be The Hot Zone. But, nonetheless, it was definitely a very interesting and kind of formative book for me, just introducing me to infectious diseases. So, as I was going into college, I was thinking that I would go into medicine. I started out kind of on a pre-med track. But then I volunteered at the hospital that was affiliated with my university and just decided that, medicine really was not for me. But I was still very interested in biology and in health. I was lucky that my university also had a college of public health, which again, had never really thought of before or understood what a career in that area meant. So I took some classes there while I was an undergrad, as well as I started doing lab research in 2 different laboratories, again, with women mentors. So that really got me started on researching infectious diseases and looking at those not just from the standpoint of a clinician, but from the standpoint of an epidemiologist and a public health professional. So when I was getting ready to graduate, by that point, I had decided that I wanted to do grad school, but I wasn't quite sure where. I went to college in Connecticut and decided to return home to Ohio to kind of take a year and figure out all the grad school stuff and where I would be going. And so my mentor at Yale actually had a colleague in Toledo, where it's kind of where I was from, that was doing research, very complementary to hers on brood-based strep. And so she contacted him and said, she had this undergraduate graduating very soon and she was looking for a job, and do you know of any openings? And it turns out that he was actually looking for someone for his lab. So I took a job in his lab as a technician for a year, ostensibly to, again, figure out kind of what I was going to be doing for grad school.
Right.
And, after about 6 months or so, I was making good progress and learning a lot of new techniques. And, he suggested, well, why don't you just stay here for graduate school? And we could use some of the project that you're already getting up and running and, use that for your PhD research. So that sounded like a pretty good deal for me.
How can you say no to that?
Yeah, exactly.
Shave some time off. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really liked it. He was a very good mentor. And, I'd heard some horror stories from other people about some of the people they were working with and how it just wasn't a good match for them. And so I knew that I'd already had someone that was good to work with and had a project that seemed like it could be dissertation material. So I stayed on there to do my PhD. But that was in very basic microbiology. We were using animal models of infection to look at gene regulation and protein expression and virulence factors of these bacteria. So, really kind of what makes these bacteria nasty. So it's interesting to me, but I knew that wasn't quite what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. My boss had been looking at this one gene Regulon, 5 genes, for pretty much his 25-year career. And I didn't want to do that.
Right. Maybe a little more variety. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So as I was finishing up my PhD, and again, I had both my 2 children during grad school. So, I had 2 young children by that time and was thinking that I wanted to do something in public health. So I applied to University of Michigan actually for their MPH program that I was thinking I would go and get an MPH degree and then, do something in public health. So again, kind of fortuitous, as I applied there, one of the people who saw my application ended up becoming my postdoctoral mentor, and she said, well, we have this training program where you would come on here and we would provide you with classes that you could take for free as part of this program. You would do a postdoctoral fellowship, so basically 2 years of research. And, instead of shelling out more money for an MPH degree, we would, pay you. So again, that sounded like a better deal rather than going deeper into debt. So I did end up working for her as a postdoc fellow under this particular training program. So I took additional classes, in epidemiological methods and research design and biostats. So all of the classes that I would need to, become an epidemiologist, but without getting that actual degree. So even though I am here, I've been a professor of epidemiology for many years now, I don't have, the formal degree that many of my students do. So even though I have a lot of the training.
Interesting. Yeah.
So with that, then I started looking for professorships as the fellowship was starting to kind of come to a close. And there happened to be one at University of Iowa that was looking for someone to come in and do research on zoonotic diseases. So these diseases that move between people and animals. And that sounded to be right up my alley. So I applied for it and ended up getting that position. So I was at Michigan for 2 years and then moved out to Iowa and was there for, again, a little over 8 years and, really established my career, got some research projects going, worked with a lot of collaborators, and eventually ended up with tenure there. But at the same time, I'm in a relationship with another academic, which is difficult.
Of course.
Because he was not able to get, a full-time secure position there. Around the University of Iowa, there are not a lot of other academic options. There are a few small liberal arts schools, but they're kind of few and far between. So that's how we ended up at Kent State, was that we were both able to get positions here and be in the same state and everything. So that's kind of how I've ended up where I am now.
Certainly. Well, a little closer to your family then, too, which is probably kind of nice, right?
Yes, absolutely. Definitely, especially with a baby here. That is nice to have family closer by.
Well, that is wonderful. Well, Tara, I think you hit some amazing points along this journey that you're describing through science. I mean, I think a lot of students and, even people more advanced in their career can relate to this experience where we thought you wanted to go to med school and then you actually started doing the things that would prepare you for med school and you thought, well, maybe not, So I think that is fantastic that you were able to kind of dive more into this world of research, but stay interested in biology, things like that. And I think also one of these critical points where you're trying to figure out what to do, you've got your bachelor's degree, you've graduated. What next? A lot of people are thinking graduate school, but how do you make that decision? I mean, you're looking at, not only the whole country, really anywhere in the world, you could be going to graduate school. It's sort of overwhelming, the different options that you have.
Right, absolutely.
So interesting to hear about all these different points on your career that sounded like key decision points that really got you to where you are today. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on today? Maybe one of these projects that you are so excited about.
Sure. We do a lot of work on a bacterium called Staph aureus. It's been a big problem in hospitals. It causes a lot of surgical infections, catheter-associated infections, if you've ever been in the hospital and had any of those or other invasive devices. In the community, it can cause a lot of skin infections. It's been increasing in athletes and especially wrestlers and football players, people who have contact sports, people who even just go to the gym can sometimes acquire this there. It's a bacterium that causes a lot of disease and even sometimes a lot of death. It causes about 15,000 deaths every year in the United States. So we look kind of at the evolution of this bacterium. How has it, become what it is today? And also, again, how it's transmitted between animals and people. So being in Iowa for so many years, Iowa is known for its corn and for its pigs. And so we worked a lot with farmers out in Iowa who raised pigs and sampled their pigs and the farmers as well to see if they were carrying Staph aureus, and if so, what molecular type of staph is it? There are a lot of different types, and some of them are associated with hospitals, some of them are associated with the community, and we were looking at this third type of Staph aureus that actually is associated with livestock. So we looked to see, how this bacterium is moving between pigs and farmers, and also farmers and their families, how it's moving through the air on farms and in rural communities, how common it is on meat products, because obviously if you have the pigs, then eventually they go on to be pork chops and bacon and ham and things like that. And we wanted to see if these bacteria would travel along from the animals to their meat products, to the grocery stores, to people's kitchens. What our work does really revolves all around that, looking at the transmission and evolution of these types of Staph aureus.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned that you were examining livestock. Does this have the same detrimental effect in livestock that it does in people? Is this something where you can tell the animal is sick and you should be worried?
Not in pigs. In pigs, Staph aureus very rarely seems to affect them symptomatically. They don't get serious invasive disease from this, and they don't even seem to get some of the more mild stuff like the skin infections that people get. It can happen, but it's pretty rare. In cattle and like some sheep and things like that, it can cause mastitis, so an inflammation of the mammary glands, which is very important, especially for dairy cattle, because that can make their milk, in some cases, undrinkable because of high bacterial counts. So it just kind of depends on the animal.
Very interesting. Well, this is fascinating research and really interesting to hear, how the application is so evident in terms of how it could affect human health. Mm-hmm. Now, it's great to hear about some of the work that you're doing and this amazing journey that you've had to get to where you are today. But we haven't yet chatted too much about some of these challenges that I think every scientist face as they go through their career. I think there are often days, weeks, months, even longer sometimes, where you just feel like everything is going wrong. And I think in the media, in the literature, you hear a lot of these success stories, but you don't hear about everything that came before it. So, Tara, can you take us back in your career to one of these points where you were struggling with something, or maybe you had a major failure, and tell us what happened and how you got through it?
Oh, absolutely. So early on in my professorship, so I got to Iowa, you kind of land in this lab and you're on your own. You're the boss now and you have to do everything, and you've not always been trained for those type of things. You're trained as a scientist and you can do the science, but now you also have to write grants and to, manage budgets and manage people. And so it's just a lot of new stuff. And the transition for me was really difficult. So the first person that I hired as a technician, was great off the start. She worked for me for 6 months. We got enough data for a first paper and things were going swimmingly. And then things were not going swimmingly. And she had some of her own issues come up. And, long story short, she just ended up kind of not coming to work anymore. And I eventually had to go through this process to terminate her. And it was terrible, not only for her and for me, but it also, of course, set my research back because I had spent the last 6 months training her up on all of these things and, basically prepping her to take over a lot of the day-to-day lab stuff so I could focus on grant writing and things. And,
right.
Then that just all totally bombed out. So I had to deal with that, deal with some of the other backup projects that we were doing that weren't going so swimmingly. And, some of the ideas that I had come in with off my postdoc of next steps to take in some of these projects. And, just encountering dead end after dead end. At the same time, I was working on writing grants for various federal agencies. And it was really a hard sell to try to get funders interested in some of this stuff because it was at this, interface of human and animal medicine. And it seemed that no one wanted to take responsibility for it. So the animal people said, no, you're looking at public health. This is human stuff. And the human people said, well, you're studying animals. Why aren't you looking at other funding sources?
You're stuck in that awkward in-between place, right?
Exactly. So, even though I thought we had a lot of really interesting ideas, it was just really hard to kind of, find the pitch for those, find the home for some of those types of grants and research projects. So that really took a couple of years to find out how to work the system and find some of those other funding opportunities that fit a little bit better. So, that was just a really difficult first few years on the tenure track. And of course, as I was going through all of this, I had, yearly reviews and they were coming in not so positive, of course, because some of these projects weren't working and the grants weren't coming in, that they were very concerned about, my future as a professor. So, really I started reaching out to a lot of other people. I had kind of been assigned a mentor when I started at this position. And again, just because I had great mentors before who were really kind of the be all end all to me, that I hadn't thought about really expanding my mentor repertoire and how I would need different mentors for different things. So it took me again, a couple of years to really start to reach out to other people and to do that successfully. But once that all kind of started to gel and, new people I could go to for different aspects of, both the science and the general career development type of things really started to move forward. And, I learned how to play the funding game and how to interact with funding agencies and their program officers and things like that. And, learned how to mentor students because I had done a little bit of that before, but nothing where I was really just, in charge and everything was on me. So, some of the first students I got through probably would not say I was the best mentor in the world, but I think I've improved in that area and improved as a scientist and, writing papers and grants and things that just really are just a skill you have to learn through lots and lots of practice. So, I think I hopefully turned some of those early setbacks and, failures in some cases into just learning experiences that I was able to draw from. And by the time I came up for tenure and pretty much sailed through because I had really built a network of both mentors, collaborators, students, and really learned how to write grants and write papers.
Certainly. Well, Tara, thank you so much for sharing this struggle, this experience that you've had with us today. I think you hit so many important points. I think this period when people just start really doing their own research as an independent faculty member, a lot of people cite this as one of the most challenging times that they've had in their career. So can you tell us, what was it like? What were some of these feelings, if you can remember, when you walked into that sort of empty lab that was yours for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, just excitement and fear. I had the time that I was at University of Michigan, I was with a very senior professor and everything, but they were doing a lot of renovations. They were actually building a whole new public health building at the time. And so our lab was in this sub-basement, very tiny because, again, people had to be moved from their old labs into kind of this temporary space while they were building the new space. And, it was this tiny lab. Everyone was on top of each other. And I went at the University of Iowa to this huge space that was just mine. And it was very intimidating. How am I going to fill this up with people and equipment and projects and things?
You just start bringing books in from home to line the shit. These are my kids' books. I don't care.
I mean, it's just, what do you do with this? Even just, when you get a budget like that, you get a startup fund and you have to plan out how you're going to spend this on personnel and on equipment and what equipment will you need. And some of this stuff, you're ordering things that cost $10,000, $50,000. That's more than I paid for my first house. And, it's like now I'm spending this on scientific equipment and the taxpayers are funding this. And, it's a little bit of freaking out.
Right, I better not screw this up. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But yeah, it's very, very intimidating.
Certainly. Well, great to hear about this experience. Certainly going in with that, I think the mix of excitement and fear is the perfect way to describe it. Well, and I love how you chatted about how a lot of these lessons that you're learning in those first couple of years are not really things that you have a class on in graduate school or that your postdoc necessarily prepares you for. It's a lot. You have to reach out to those mentors. You have to sort of figure a lot of this stuff out by yourself, which is, I think, part of the challenge in those first couple of years there.
Yeah, absolutely. And trying to do that without too many speed bumps, hopefully, is something I try to work with, again, with my grad students, and I'm hiring my first ever postdoc very soon. So, I've tried to prepare them for the reality of kind of what academic careers are and things you'll have to do besides just being great in the lab and things like that. So I think that's something that, even though my mentors were fabulous, it's something that maybe, and I probably wasn't proactive enough in trying to search that out at that time. Sometimes there's just things you go back and you wish you had known or wish you had asked, and that is definitely one of them.
Certainly. Well, great to hear about these things that you wish you would have known in hindsight, kind of looking back, so that our listeners out there, if they're going through the same thing, start being proactive, start getting everything in a row. Well, Tara, fantastic to hear about this challenge and how you were able to work through it and be successful. And now we don't just want to talk about the dark times in your career. Can you tell us next about one of these success stories from your lab? And this can be one of these big successes, grants, papers, things like that, or even just a small victory along the way that you were able to celebrate.
Yeah, well, we have been pretty successful at grants and papers, but what really kind of warms my heart is seeing new students who are able to really just get things. You can see the moments when it starts to click. And, like this summer, I had an undergraduate student come in. We have a program here, a research experience for undergraduates in the summer, where they come in for about 10 weeks and get introduced to a project and at the end present their results. So we had a student in the summer, and I try with students to kind of modulate what they're going to do for their level of background and experience. So she came in with, a little bit of research experience under her belt, not really anything directly in my area that she had done before, but, she understood kind of what research was. So we had sat down and kind of brainstormed some project ideas, but I really thought that she had the independence to start to put together things herself, of course, with my supervision, but I really kind of let her really lead things. So we did a little summer project that she picked out. We did some environmental sampling. She picked out all the sampling sites that we would go to. We worked on some of the methods together, but, she really led all of the lab work and really led putting together her poster and eventually what I hope will be her paper from this. So, it was really nice just to see her kind of move from, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing with this. Here are some ideas I've had, but I have no idea if they're any good, into putting together a really pretty sophisticated poster at the end of this, being able to field questions from other people who are longtime biologists and obviously have had much more experience than she has, but she really held her own. And now, she's really excited to go on potentially in public health research. So, it's really nice to see a student kind of come in, maybe a little bit unsure about things initially, and then really just kind of find their footing and find that, hey, this may be one of their passions.
Tara, I love hearing about these stories, these experiences of scientists working with undergraduates or young scientists. When you're describing it, it's almost like how a parent sounds when they're talking about teaching their child to walk or something. It's like you're so proud of what they're able to accomplish. And you want to give that freedom. You're a little bit afraid. You're not sure they have all the skills they need. And then you see them do it fantastically. And it's just, you kind of sit back in awe for that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had some great students. I really am proud of all the students that have come through my lab, and some of them are doing great things right now. So I've been very lucky in that arena.
Absolutely. Well, great to hear the success story. So congratulations to you and to your student for that amazing project that you were able to pull off in the summer. And hopefully that does turn into a fantastic paper that you're able to get in.
Yeah, we'll be working on that this fall.
Yeah, things to look forward to. All right. Well, Tara, it is great to hear about some of the work that you're doing in the lab and certainly these mentoring opportunities that you have to work with students. And I know researchers keep so busy between the science, working with students, teaching, all the different things they're trying to balance. And they don't often have a lot of free time to maybe sit back, relax, and enjoy a good book. But I've gotten so many fantastic book recommendations from scientists whose, I think, to-read lists are as long as mine in many cases. But can you tell us today, Tara, about a book that we can add to our list? Can you tell us a book that you would really recommend we check out?
I kind of balance my free time reading between, what I call like the nerd books, which are more science books, usually also infectious diseases. So, I have to plug one because it's one by a great journalist, Maren McKenna, and two, it's also about some of the work that I do. So she wrote a book called Superbug that actually talks about methicillin-resistant Staph aureus and its history and its evolution and some of the different aspects of antibiotic resistance and overuse of antibiotics. So that is an excellent one that I always recommend to people. Some other really good science books that I've read in the last few years are one called Asleep. And it's about this epidemic of basically a kind of sleeping sickness, but it was endemic to the U.S. in the early part of the 20th century. And one called The Ghost Map, which is about Jon Snow and the cholera outbreaks in London in the 1800s and kind of how those were discovered and, mapped as the name suggests. And, just really how all of that was investigated. Then for some
non-nerd books, though.
Yeah, non-nerd books. Fiction books. I really like the Silo series by Hugh Howey. I tend to still kind of keep into the kind of science fiction type of things. So that's one that was out recently. And he did some, really interesting things with that. He published it all online via like little short Amazon kind of Kindle type of books before he released it as an actual kind of physical paperback. Then I'm also a member of the board of advisors for the Zombie Research Society. So I do like some zombie books. And World War Z, the movie was not so great, but the book is actually really interesting. And especially as we're, again, looking at things like Ebola and how that has had economic issues with the countries where it's infected and people are shutting down their borders and restricting travel. I mean, World War Z actually, of course, it's not real, but it actually delves into some of those issues of quarantine and, public response to a very scary infectious disease and things like that. So it's much more than just a zombie book. Right. It's actually a zombie book that actually has a lot of interesting implications for, things like pandemics.
Absolutely. Well, Tara, those are some fantastic book recommendations. I'll put them out there on our website for all of our listeners to check out and certainly add them to my ever-growing list as well. So can you tell us about the Zombie Research Society? I had no idea it even existed.
Sure. So this was a brainchild of a guy named Matt Moak, who, has grown up loving zombies and really wanted to get into some of the science behind them. So he started this group, which now has many thousands of members worldwide, to discuss some of that things. The advisory board is mostly kind of neuroscientists, of course, because zombies infects the brain. But I'm kind of the infectious disease expert, since a lot of the current zombie stories kind of have that as, an infection and a virus or something that is transmitted. It also includes George Romero, who's kind of the grandfather of a lot of these zombies tales. It's been an interesting thing. I haven't been able to meet up with most of them in person, but there have been a lot of talks, via email and things like that. And we get a lot of media, especially around Halloween. I'll actually be doing a talk in Northern Michigan on zombies on October 30th. So
fantastic.
A lot of press whenever a big zombie news story comes out for people who actually want to kind of understand, well, could this actually happen? Or, is this accurate or things like that?
I love this kind of digging into the science behind potential zombie incidences. I think that's really, really cool. Now, in addition to some of the fantastic research opportunities that researchers have and some of the fantastic work that you're doing, I know a lot of researchers are really excited about the opportunities that they get to travel. Can you think back on all these different opportunities for travel for science that you've had, Tara, and tell us a little bit about your favorite place that you've been and why it was your favorite?
Sure. So I have got to travel a lot. Most of the field work that I have done has been throughout the state of Iowa, which always is fun, going to new places, and especially Iowa. Again, people think of it as, I don't know, kind of this just very boring state.
A lot of corn, maybe.
Yeah, I think of it as like this flat pancake, Kansas-y type of state, but it's really not. It actually has a lot of beautiful rolling hills and scenery and lakes and bluffs. So, there's a lot of travel on kind of rural gravel road and things like that, things that aren't even in the GPS. So, you have to go by a farmer's.
Get creative, yeah.
Yeah, directions of turn left at the red barn with the gray sign, things like that. So that was a lot of fun while I was doing that. Internationally, my favorite place that I have been so far is Mongolia, just because, who goes to Mongolia?
Right.
So it's kind of unique. But, it has such an interesting mix of cultures and things because, of course, it has this many thousands of year old history, and people still are actually, very proud of, Genghis Khan from there. He has this, of course, international reputation as this crazy warlord, but they see him as kind of this national hero. He brought honor and things to Mongolia. And then there's, besides the history, I was in Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital city, which is just such a mix. They had influence from Russia for a long time, and Russian was one of the national languages. So there are a lot of kind of Soviet era, old 40s, 50s, squat stone buildings.
Really? I had no idea. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then next to them, they're building all these new like sky rises and things with glass and steel. And a lot of the sidewalks still are kind of crumbling stone, again, up next to these amazing new buildings. And the people there, again, in the capital city, you could take them off the street in Manhattan or something. The women, have a lot of high fashion and high heels. I don't know how they do that on those terrible sidewalks.
It's impressive.
Yeah, just such a weird, mix of old and new, of kind of Western influences and Eastern influences. And you can go out to the countryside and they actually have an old model like Genghis Khan camp with the gers, kind of the round tents and everything. And to get there, you go out through these progressively smaller and smaller towns, and then eventually you're just on dirt. There aren't even roads. They're just kind of going, south. I was with a tour guide and just driving along these hills. Occasionally you'll, get stopped by a herd of goats or something. And I mean, it's just amazing. And then the people that are, out there are, again, these like nomadic herders that are living in their gers with their family and their livestock and, just moving from place to place as following kind of the grass and things. So, it's just such a unique place and, something that really I've not been able to see again in some of the other places that I've been to.
Certainly. So what brought you to Mongolia?
We had a conference there. So one of my colleagues was doing some studies on avian influenza, and one of the collaborators he had with was in Mongolia. So they organized an international conference there. And so that started some collaborations that I had with people in their hospitals looking at antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So I've had the chance to send some students over there to do some additional projects, and I'm hoping to get back there maybe next year to set up some additional work.
Certainly. Well, I love sort of living vicariously through all these experiences that scientists have to go to these amazing, far away places. And just, I love this description you're giving of the town, the city, how you're seeing this juxtaposition of old and new and different cultures kind of side by side. And then going out, not too far away, but, out in the country, and just this completely different lifestyle that you were able to see there. That is fascinating. So wonderful travel opportunity to share with us today. And I think in addition to these amazing opportunities for travel, a lot of scientists are really excited about the people that they get to work with. So we talked about some of these mentors that you've had over the years, some of these wonderful students that you've had come through the lab. And I think when you look back at all these different research groups that you've been a part of, a lot of them have their own personality that's really dictated by, maybe contrary to the stereotypes about scientists, the oftentimes very funny people that you've worked with. So can you think back on all these different places and maybe share with us some of the traditions? Oftentimes you get these quirky traditions, or just some of the funny memories that you've had there.
Yeah, we don't have any traditions, but we do, as I mentioned, a lot of field sampling. And at the University of Iowa, we had a lot of students that came in from, again, people think it's all just a bunch of farm kids or something, but it's really not. There's a lot of kids from kind of smaller towns, suburbs, and even a lot across the border in Chicago kind of area that end up coming to University of Iowa, especially for grad school, which is mostly what I had dealt with. So, even though we were in a very agricultural state, a lot of people had never been on farms before. So we take them out, oh, why don't you come with us? We're going to do some pig sampling.
Sounds like a grand adventure, yeah.
It is. So, I get a lot of these kids that have never been on a farm, and, we tell them, well, okay, so the pigs we're going to swab are about, 12 to 15 weeks old. And I think they're still thinking of those like little tiny pigs that you can kind of hold in your hand. Yeah, little cute ones, not realizing that a pig that's 12 to 15 weeks old is about 50 to 60 pounds. And they're really strong. Imagine like a very muscled 50 to 60 pound dog.
Right.
That's kind of what we're trying to deal with. And then you're trying to stick a Q-tip up their nose.
Oh, no.
So, you get these kind of, newbie kids out on these farms and dress them in protective gear and tell them basically to, okay, catch that pig and hold it so someone else can stick a swab in its nose. And it's kind of hilarious the first time they try to do it. And they don't realize also how loud pigs are. I mean, pigs can squeal really, really loud. And until you're in an enclosed barn with a lot of those pigs doing that, they just have no idea, the sound even that comes from that, much less the odor too.
I was going to say, mostly you think of oink, which is, kind of a quiet little thing.
Yeah, there's lots of grunts and lots of squeals. So yeah, not as cute as a little oink oink little pig with a curly tail. So that's always a lot of fun, is to introduce them to that type of environment and that type of sampling. And, sometimes even if we're doing it on more pastured farms, so pigs that would not be in a confinement facility or in pens and barns, but that are kind of roaming the field, we oftentimes have to have some of the farmers help round them up. So the farmers will be out on their four-wheeler kind of trying to move the pigs in one area so we can catch them. And it's a very different experience for especially some of the kids who have never had any contact with farm animals before, and universally pretty hilarious.
Well, I think you need some video of this occurrence. So tell me, you mentioned that you wear protective gear when you're, working with the pigs. What does one wear when swabbing pig noses?
It depends. I mean, typically we would just put on some coveralls. Mostly we're more concerned with, and the farmers are more concerned with, us bringing something onto their farm. They certainly don't want us to infect their pigs with anything by accident. Of course, we're also concerned about things that the pigs may carry, and we don't want any of our students getting any infections from them as well. So, typically some kind of coveralls, boots, covers for our shoes, gloves, and face masks in some cases.
Interesting. Well, that sounds like high fashion there, chasing pigs around.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, Tara, I think this sounds like an incredible experience. Probably fun to maybe sit back and watch the students the first time.
Oh, yes.
Well, wonderful memory. And I'm sure it's something that your students will always remember as well, these opportunities to go out and sample pigs. Fantastic. Well, I love hearing about these memories, these traditions that scientists have. And I also love chatting about, the research that you're doing, some of the work that you're doing, but also the work that you haven't yet had an opportunity to do. And this might be because certain things are standing in your way. So things like funding and staff and technology and feasibility, a lot of these constraints on research. So Tara, can you tell us today, if we took these constraints away, what is one research question that you are just dying to know the answer to?
So I work with, again, bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics, which is, of course, a big and ever-growing issue. So I would love to do, a very large nationwide study looking at antibiotic resistance in hospitals, in people's homes, in farms, in every state, and with a lot of people, lots of power for our study, to look at really how it's generated, how it's spreading, what are the most important factors, and really how to prevent it. which, we all know a little bit of this, but some people still will cite that there are gaps in the research and things haven't been proven conclusively enough, even though, again, many of the scientists would argue otherwise. So just be able to do this many, many millions of dollars worth of study to, conclusively once and for all fill some of those gaps so that even the most ardent skeptics could not overlook some of the influences that are causing antibiotic resistance. And then, of course, also throw more money into development of new drugs, which is, a very scary thing for me that we are running out of antibiotics and we don't have a lot that's in the pipeline to replace them. So I would definitely employ a lot of people to come up with some novel solutions for that as well.
Certainly. Well, I know how it goes with some of those skeptics. You have to just keep drowning them in data until they believe you.
Yes. Yes.
So with this antibiotic-resistant exploration, would you start with Staph aureus, or is there another bacteria that you'd want to investigate first?
Actually, some of the gram-negatives, so some of the E. coli's and related bacteria are becoming even more scary than Staph aureus. So, Staph, of course, is my kind of pet pathogen, but I think some of the other ones might actually be more serious. So I might, allocate a little bit more for them.
Gotcha. Well, those are fantastic research questions. And I love this project. And I think certainly funding, it seems like a major limitation for this sort of thing, just because of the scale of what would be amazing to be able to see. But certainly great projects, great things to think about, and certainly important to think about this development of additional antibiotics. As this resistance is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, we're going to continue to need to keep exploring alternatives as we sort of keep putting antibiotics on the back shelf. All right, this one doesn't work, this one doesn't work.
Right.
So very interesting food for thought for us to ponder. Now, I know we mentioned that throughout your career, you've had some amazing mentors and you've gone to them throughout some of these tough times that you've had. Can you share with us today, Tara, what you would consider the best piece of advice that you've ever received over the course of your career or maybe the course of your life?
Yeah, really just to ask, ask anyone, ask advice. With me and trying to set up a lab, ask for equipment, ask to see what your chair can do for you, ask to see what your dean can do for you. It just never hurts, or actually very rarely hurts, at least. I can't say never.
Got to have those qualifiers, yeah?
Yeah, but the worst thing that can happen usually is you'll get turned down. And I don't know if it's kind of a Midwestern attitude or what, but, you grow up and you hate to bother people. You don't want to. I'm
from Ohio, too. I have this problem.
Yeah,
it's really
bad. Yeah, so it really took me a long time to get to that point where, okay, if I don't know something or if I have questions or if, I just want someone to read my papers, that I will go and ask for help. I think that's so important and so critical at every stage of development, whether you're a college undergraduate and struggling in a class or, you're a associate professor and, maybe trying to look for a new direction for your research or something, just to go out and talk to people and ask for input. Yeah, just do that more. I still tell myself to do that more.
That is fantastic advice. And I think, when you finally work up that courage to ask, the people are usually quite happy to help you or at least listen to you,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially for people at maybe, a step or two above you as far as whatever level you're at. We want to talk about ourselves and help people and help them avoid some of the mistakes maybe that we made. So yeah, I have not really had any disappointments with that. So yeah, do it more.
Yeah. Wonderful advice, Tara. Now, is there any other last piece of advice or maybe last piece of inspiration that you want to leave our listeners with today?
I think it's just to realize that there is no one correct path for everyone. And I think this is a problem, especially in academia, where some people, just want to crank out mini-me's and think that everyone that they train should follow the same path that they did. I think we're seeing that is just, one, not an option because there are simply not the jobs out there. And two, I think it makes for a lot of unhappiness for trainees if they're being groomed for maybe a position that they just don't want, right. Won't work for them, for whatever reasons. So, I try very hard to, when I bring in students or other mentees, to talk with them about really where do they see themselves in 2 years or 5 years, and what can I do to get them there? So really, I think we have to get over this idea that everyone is going to be doing the same thing, and really to help people develop along their own, trajectory, whatever that might be.
Certainly. Well, I think that is another amazing piece of advice or inspiration, not being afraid to chat with your mentor about alternative career options and certainly making your preferences known. Otherwise they're going to keep trying to groom you to be the next them,
Right.
Unless you mention it. Yeah.
Right. And if they won't, listen to you or still try to keep you on that path and you don't want it, find other mentors. That can be your research mentor, but you may have to have another one for life advice or career advice or something. So again, don't be afraid to ask. Goes all
Absolutely.
back to that.
Supplemental mentors, definitely a great idea.
Yes.
Well, Tara, I have really enjoyed our conversations today. Can you tell our listeners now how they can follow up to learn more about you or your research?
Absolutely. I'm all over the web. I have a website where I try to kind of collect everything that I do as far as the science and science communication and contact info. So that's just taracsmith.com, taracsmith.com. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Etiology, AETIOLOGY. I'm on Facebook. If you just Google Tara C. Smith, PhD, I have a Facebook site for my research, and I talk about infectious disease. And then my email is tsmit, TSMIT 176 @kent.edu. So any of those I should be able to respond to.
Wonderful. Well, listeners, feel free to find Tara out there on the web. Check out what she's working on, learn more about what they're doing there. And Tara, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Certainly. And thank you to our listeners out there. Join us again next time for another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.